What's up guys, and welcome to my buffed Welt guide. Welt is one of the 4 characters receiving a buff in the 4.2 update, which does change how he is played. And so in this video, I'm taking you over his buffed kit, new best Lightcones, best Relic sets and Planar Ornaments, the stats you want to run, and finally some team building ideas. Keep this disclaimer in mind that the background footage you are seeing is unbuffed Welt. I'm unfortunately a pleb who doesn't have access to creator experience, so I have to showcase Welt unbuffed on my actual account in the 4.1 update. However, rest assured, all the info I'm talking about, including kit, what I'm going to be recommending for relics, teams, so on and so forth, is all for buffed Welt in consideration.
Stuck grinding in Honkai Star Rail? Need Stellar Jades fast? We've got you covered. Head over to U7 Buy, your ultimate gaming hub for save fast and cheap in-game top-ups. Whether it's Star Rail or your other favorite games, U7 delivers instantly and players love it. Check out their Trustpilot reviews, they're actually top ranked. On the Honkai Star Rail direct top-up page, you can recharge your account in seconds. For example, 8080 Honorific shards cost $99.99 in the official store, but on U7 Buy, you can see here it's way cheaper. Just pick your server, enter UID, pay securely, and boom, your account is instantly loaded. Want extra savings? Use code PRETSR at checkout for 5% off, perfect for last minute pulls, battle passes, or surprising a friend. And here's a bonus. If you spend $80 a month on U7 Buy, you can grab the Honkai Star Rail Express Pass for only 1 cent, which is nearly free. Click on the link in my description, recharge fast, save more, and keep blazing those trails.
Welt's basic attack deals imaginary damage based off his attack to an enemy. His skill does imaginary damage based off his attack to a designated enemy, and 4 extra times with each hit doing imaginary damage based off his attack as well to a random enemy, and on hit having a 75% base chance to reduce the enemy's speed by 10% for 2 turns. His ultimate deals imaginary damage based off his attack to all enemies with a 100% base chance to imprison hit enemies for 1 turn, where enemy targets will have their actions delayed by 12% and their speed reduced by 10%. His ultimate will also inflict hit enemies with the weightless state, and in the weightless state, enemies will have their actions delayed by 4% every time they are hit. That triggers up to 8 times per target per turn, and weightless will last for 2 turns. Welt's talent makes it to where enemies in weightless state have their defense reduced by 40% and speed reduced by 5%. When Welt attacks an enemy that is slowed, he additionally deals imaginary additional damage equal to 100% of his attack to an enemy. Welt's technique creates a special dimension for 15 seconds, where enemies in it will have their movement speed reduced by 50%. Entering battle with the special dimension active will have 100% base chance to imprison enemies for 1 turn, where enemies will have their actions delayed by 20% and speed reduced by 10%. For his bonus traces, his A2 will make it to where when ally targets attack someone under weightless state, the ally's damage dealt will increase by 10%, stacking up to 10 times and last for 2 turns, and at the start of the battle, Welt will regenerate 30 energy. For this trace, do keep note that this applies to every ally individually, so one ally attacking an enemy under weightless is not going to provide the stack for the entire team, it's only going to provide it for that character attacking. So if your team was Welt and then Asheville and also someone like Tribby, if Asheville were to attack an enemy, he's only going to get that 10% damage dealt for himself, and it would not apply to Tribby. Same thing with if Tribby attacked them, Tribby would get the damage dealt, but Asheville would not. Welt's A4 will make it to where when his basic attack or skill is used, additionally deals an extra instance of additional damage to the enemy target. The additional damage dealt by basic attack is equal to 80% of the basic attack damage multiplier, and the additional damage for the skill is equal to 120% of the skill damage multiplier. And Welt's A6 will make it to where when his effect hit rate is greater than 40%, every 10% of effect hit rate exceeding that value will increase his attack by 20%, with a maximum increase of 80%, and when Welt uses his ultimate, he additionally will restore 5 energy. For his Eidolons, Welt's E1 will make it to where after using skill or ultimate to hit an enemy with weightless, deals an additional instance of imaginary additional damage equal to 40% of the ultimate's damage multiplier that is triggered once per attack. His E2 will allow Welt to regenerate 3 energy when his talent is triggered. His E4 will now make enemies under weightless to have their all-type res lowered by 30%. And his E6 will make it to where when Welt uses skill or ultimate to hit an enemy target that is slowed, his crit rate will be increased by 30% and his crit damage will be increased by 60%. For best Lightcone options, of course this does depend on if you are aiming for a DPS Welt, sub DPS, full out support, but there is one that he can actually utilize very well now, and is realistically good on any one of his roles, and that is the tutorial mission Lightcone. 20% effect hit rate for the wear and 4 energy when attacking a defense reduced enemy, and at S5 it's 40% effect hit rate with a energy. At S5 this practically provides you half of the effect hit rate you do want to build on it, plus he has 28% in his trace tree, so you're only really missing like like 12% to have all the amount you would need. And since in his weightless state, you have enemies have their defense be reduced, so you are also able to regen more energy. So this is helping you achieve the effect hit rate requirement to land his debuffs, get the full attack conversion, while also getting energy for more ults and more weightless state uptime, which is why it's actually a really good Lightcone for really every single role. As in any role, this is going to help you keep more uptime on his ultimate by letting you get it faster and also make him easier to build. Due to that reason, this is going to be one of his best overall options. For the DPS side of things, Akrath's signature is very good still, with an increase to crit damage by 36%. The wearer gains the ability to inflict Barrage Fizzle on an enemy target, and the wearer will deal 24% increased damage to enemies with Barrage Fizzle, and an additional 24% damage dealt by ultimate. So it's just more damage, you do build it with crit, so the extra crit damage is good for the times you're critting. 24% vulnerability for all his damage, so basic attack skill, and an additional 24%, so you get 48% for ultimate specifically. And his ultimate does hit pretty hard, hence why this actually is a very good option for his pure DPS side of things. A mix of DPS and support is Silverwolf signature Lightcone, providing 24% increase to effect hit rate. Attacking enemy with 3 or more debuffs will increase the wearer's crit rate by 12%, and after the wearer attacks an enemy, there's a 100% base chance to implant Aether Code on an enemy that doesn't have it, making them take 12% increased damage for 1 turn. So again, effect hit rate is going to make it even easier to build him to get that higher requirement, and at the same time, attacking an enemy with 3 or more debuffs will provide more crit rate for Welt himself. So you're getting effect hit rate and also crit rate, which is very, very, very good. And to top it all off, you're able to make enemies take more damage, which will not only make him do more damage, but your entire team, which a lot of Welt's teams, even if you're running him as a hyper carry, might actually have characters that do damage. So regardless of the role, that would be beneficial to the entire team, which is why her signature option is also very good. Cypher's signature Lightcone is also good, providing 18% increase to the wearer's speed, and when the wearer attacks an enemy, there is a 120% base chance to inflict bamboozled on enemies, which will defense shred them by 16% for 2 turns, and if the wearer has 170 speed or higher, the wearer also will be able to inflict Theft State on every enemy target, which will further defense decrease the enemies by 8% for 2 turns. So this Lightcone provides you up to a 24% defense shred, which actually pairs perfectly with his base kit and the weightless state now, since now with this Lightcone and enemies under weightless as well, we'll have a total of 64% defense shred, which is very, very good. And then if you have other sources such as support Eidolons or just Asheville existing on the field, since he also defense shreds everyone by 40% by existing, getting up to that higher amount of defense shreds or even 100% is a very possible, which is actually one of the best amps you can get on any team. Also, the percentage speed increase of 18% is good. This can be used on either or build, like you don't have to go for the full 170 speed to get this. Of course, if you're able to reach 170 speed, then it becomes even better, but even for the 16% on its own, it is still good. But on a very high speed alongside an Eagle build, this can actually help you a lot to help those high thresholds, and getting the full value makes this Lightcone very good. For 4-star options, Good Night and Sleep Well also is good for the DPS side of Welt, so if you want to focus more on his damage, increasing the wearer's damage by 12% for every debuff the enemy has, stacking up to 3 times, and at S5, it's 24% increase to damage dealt. So you can get up to a 72% increase to damage dealt, which is just going to increase his overall damage by a lot. And all these Lightcones having like the 3 or more debuff requirement is very easy now, since Welt has multiple debuffs to do it himself, and then usually units you pair him alongside have it as well, so you could usually get full uptime right away. So for DPS Welt, this is very strong. Pearls is also another option you can use if you are aiming for more defense shred, with a 60% base chance to ensnare an enemy that you hit, which will reduce their defense by 12%, and an S5 is 100% base chance with a 16% defense shred. Pretty much just a worse version of Cypher's signature, doesn't provide speed and only caps out at 16% defense shred, but since it's a 4-star and it's been in the game since launch pretty much, it is extremely accessible and it is a solid option to use on your Welt, especially now since he has his big 40% defense shred on his own, because again, the more value of defense shred / ignore you have, the stronger it gets. Another good one for his DPS side of things is Boundless Choreo, which will increase the wearer's crit rate by 8%, and the wearer will deal 24% more crit damage to enemies that are slowed or have defense reduced. And at S5, it's 16% crit rate with 48% crit damage dealt. 16% crit rate with this 4-star Lightcone is actually very good, and 48% crit damage dealt is also extremely strong. And the requirement is just having enemies slowed, which Welt can do, and also now reduce defense, which buff Welt now can do. So he's able to utilize this Lightcone at its fullest very frequently. So for his DPS potential, this is an extremely strong option as well. For relic sets, There are two best in slots that you would change depending on if you're going for a full-on DPS or a more support slash sub DPS. For pure DPS, his best in slot is still going to be Pioneer, with the 2-piece increasing damage to enemies with debuffs, 4-piece increases crit rate, and the Where will deal increased crit damage to enemies with at least 2/3 debuffs, and the Where inflicting a debuff will increase the aforementioned effects by 100% for 1 turn. Enemies on Welt's team will always be debuffed, so the 2-piece will always be active. 4-piece provides some crit rate and increased crit damage to enemies, and since it's really easy to have a bunch of debuffs up on enemies, especially nowadays, and with Welt's buffs, you will mostly have the full effect of this, and of course he himself inflicts a debuff, so you get the aforementioned effects increase with a good amount of crit damage dealt and also up to 8% crit rate. So great for building him, great for best damage output, and this would be by far the best one you would use for his damage potential. For his sub DPS slash supportive side, you guessed it, it is Eagle. 2-piece is useless, 4-piece will advance forward the Ware's action by 25% when they use their ultimate. Especially since Welt can hold the tutorial Lightcone now on his own and is not teammate reliant for that. You run this set, build him with a bunch of speed, put him on tutorial. If you have his E2, you can get even more. You can get even 1-turn ultimates with him. It is a very potent set on Welt now, especially since having frequent ultimates on him is going to be important just so you can keep up the weightless debuff to have enemies have their defense remain to be shred and also delay their actions. So for sustainless setups and just sub DPS or just pure support, Eagle would be the set you want to go, but be sure you are hitting thresholds for it to matter. As I always mention, acting quicker before enemies, gaining a full turn, so on and so forth. It's really something you want to use if you are knowing what you're doing with it. Since if you're using it, you're getting ultimates, but you're not really getting to act before an enemy that would otherwise kill you, or getting another turn, then it's not really doing much for you, and in that case, you would technically be better using something else. So when you are using the set, be sure you are speed tuning correctly. Another one for his DPS is the 4-piece Wastelander set, with the 2-piece increasing imaginary damage by 10%, 4-piece when dealing damage to debuff enemies, the Were has their crit rate increased by 10%, and when they deal damage to imprisoned enemies, their crit damage is increased by 20%. 2-piece will increase all his sources of damage since he does do imaginary damage always. 4-piece can give you 10% crit rate practically permanently, and then for the times you do have enemies imprisoned, VIA attacking enemies that are in his ultimate state, or when you do just break an enemy that has imaginary weakness, with an imaginary character obviously, in that case, 20% crit damage dealt as well. So this would be the other set. It's going to be worse than Pioneer, but it's still a DPS option. And then past that, it is 2-piece. That of course would also depend on if you're going more DPS side of things, or if you're going more support. For more support, you would just do 2-piece speed combination, so 2-piece relieved ordeal with hacker space, Warrior Goddess, or the Diviner set, since you ideally just want to get as much speed as possible. If you want to mix and match it, you could do 2-piece speed with 2-piece in one of the crit sets. So for crit rate, it would be World Remaking Deliverer or Scholar. For crit damage, Wage Strider or Everglorious. And then if you are just going for the pure DPS set, in that case, one of the crit sets that was mentioned, and 2-piece attack percent does work, so 2-piece hero set, 2-piece wind soaring, 2-piece prisoner, or 2-piece musketeers. Combine that with 2-piece Pioneer also does work, or 2-piece Wastelander for the imaginary. When doing 2-piece, there's not really much difference, so just use whatever has the best stats. For Planar Ornaments, this also does depend for what role you're going for. Just to make it simple, I'm going to start with the DPS side of things. A simple one to use is going to be Glamoff, with 12% attack for the Were and up to 18% more damage, depending on the speed you do have. 135 is 12% more damage, and 160 is 18% more damage. If you're putting him as a main hyper carry, there is more likely than not you're not going to get the full effect since you're not focusing on that much speed. However, if you're doing a sub DPS more focus on his damage, then there is a chance you could, because in that case you want to build as much speed as possible if you can, but it's very, very situational. But even at just 135, it's 12% attack and 12% damage, which doesn't make it strong. Pairing him with Danang Permansa Terre allows you to use Banan Amusement, which provides 16% crit damage and up to an additional 32% crit damage if a target summoned by the Were is on the field. Since Welt does not do that, you need Danang and his dragon attached to Welt just so you can get the actual requirement here, giving you up to 48% crit damage. This would be one of the best for his DPS potential, but of course it is going to lock you to using Permansa Terre Danang. Another one for his more DPS side of things is Pan Cosmic, providing 10% effect hit rate. Meanwhile, the Were's attack increases by an amount equal to 25% of current effect hit rate up to 25%. The only reason you run this is if you are struggling to reach that 80% effect hit rate, and this would be the reason you do cap it out. So if this actually helps you get the missing 10%-ish effect hit rate you would be missing on your actual build, then Pan Cosmic is actually very usable. You won't get the full effect of 25% since you require 100% effect hit rate for that, but you still will be able to get a good amount of the effect hit rate conversion from here since you still would have 80, plus he gets a bunch of attack from the conversion in his base trace anyways, so you still get a little more out of it. But again, this is only one you'd be using if you are missing that last 10%-ish effect hit rate, not able to reach 80% effect hit rate without it. If pairing him with a Nihility character, you can use Ismo for 12% attack and 12% crit rate. For the crit rate, you need someone else to follow the same path as the wearer, so in this case, you would need someone else to be Nihility on the team. If you do have the requirement, then of course, this becomes good. Now, if focusing more on his supportive side, the options are either running an actual supportive set or running Von Walk. Starting it off with Von Walk, 5% energy regen rate and a 40% advance forward entering battle, if having 120 speed or higher, which shouldn't be a problem. This allows you to 1 act first, get your skill off, and probably get your ultimate right away, just so you can put enemies into weightless instantly. So this is a very, very good setup Planar Ornament, while also allowing you to get very high rotations and achieve stuff like 3 turns within the first MLC cycle a lot easier, especially pairing it with stuff like Eagle and just general high speeds. So for good setup, Von Walk is going to be very strong. Otherwise, you can just throw on a supportive set on him. Lushaka is going to be the most common. 5% energy regen rate and 12% attack for the character position first in the team lineup. So whoever is the main DPS of the team, you would just position them first. That would be the main one. You can use something like Keel as well, but the thing with Keel is it requires some effect res building. For some reason, Welt's trace tree gives 10% effect res and this one gives 10%. So you would still be missing 10%, but if you have the ability to get 10% missing effect res to get the effect, then you get 10% crit damage for everyone, so it does work out. If pairing him with an imaginary DPS specifically, then you can use Penacony for 5% energy regen rate and 10% damage for everyone that is the same type as the wearer. The main stats on the relics, for the body you would run crit rate or crit damage corresponding to which one you need more. This remains true for all the roles because running an effect hit rate body is pretty undesirable now. Granted, it could be still really hard to hit if you are only running effect hit rate being the source of his traces, but in that case you'd be running Pan Cosmic to get an additional 10%, and it is just better to get closest to 80% for the actual full trace conversion. Running an effect hit rate body is going to significantly reduce the amount of damage output you can get. For the feat, you can run speed for any role that is not going to be a base speed with a hyperspeed sparkle. So for a -1 as a DPS or just a sub DPS in general, or if you're doing Eagle setups where you want to get a bunch of speed, that would be speed boots. If you're running him as a main DPS with sparkle, in that case, you would run base speed, so attack percent boots. For the orb, you can do imaginary damage or attack percent. Imaginary is better, but just use whichever has better stats. And for the link rope, if you're running him as a sub DPS / support, you want to run energy regen. You can honestly do so even as a main carry just to get more ultimates, but as a main carry, you're probably going to be giving him a lot of extra turn sources such as action advance. So in that case, you could run attack percent rope. For the substats, first and foremost, speed is going to be important. If you're running him as a hyper carry, doing him -1, get him 1 speed above your Sunday or Bronia. As a sub DPS in general, just having 134 at baseline will be fine. But if you're running him as a pure support / sustainless setup, in that case, you'd be running a bunch of speed, trying to get upwards of 160 plus speed. And then if you're doing a sparkle team where, well, is base speed, in that case, you don't run speed at all. Past that would be the effect hit rate conversion trace, which requires a total of 80%. To guarantee Welt's debuffs, you would need 67% effect hit rate, and so you're only 13% off, so it's best to really aim for that last 13% to fully cap out his trace for a bunch of attacks. So aiming for 80% effect hit rate is going to be ideal. You want to do that if you're running him as a sub DPS, a support, a main carry, in any role you want to cap out that thing. Past that is just focusing on more attack percent, crit rate, and crit damage. Ideally, again, in all roles, you want to aim for good crit ratios and stuff, since that's just how you want to build them. Even as a sustain / support speed bot, you want to try to get some damage out of him, since he is able to do that now, so it is still worth aiming for. But primarily as a more focused sub DPS rather than a full-on support, you still want to aim for a healthy amount of crit. Getting his crit to around 70% as a sub DPS is going to be fine, and then just as much crit damage as you can. Attack percent, you don't have to focus on too much, just because he does have a big attack conversion, so you don't have to focus on it as much. And then if you are running him as a main carry, be sure in battle you have 100% crit rate. Do keep in mind, if you have his E6, you are able to get a 30% increase to crit rate and 60% to crit damage when attacking someone that's slowed. Since that's going to be almost always, it is a good thing to consider in your build, which would require you to build even less crits. So again, keep that in mind if you do have his E6. For Eagle / Von Walk setups specifically, in this case, you can very much just ignore crit. If you're able to get it on your pieces, that's going to be good, but you're already going to have your hands tied with building as much speed as possible. Effect hit rate won't be too much of a problem with you because you're most likely running tutorial, so you're not going to need much. In those cases, just focus on mainly speed. Getting it around to 170 or higher, even in the 180s, would be your goal. Now for some general team building with buffed Welt. I'm gonna be honest, buff Welt is such a good debuffer, you can really use him almost anywhere, but there's of course teams where he's going to excel as opposed to others. One of Welt's best roles, besides being a DPS if you're focusing on that, is going to be the fact that he enables a lot of sustainless comps to just work better. Since he has slow and also action delay, that is where you're going to utilize him in sustainless comps best. And another thing is to stack up his own damage percent buff for the team and them individually. High frequency is going to be preferred, and of course that is going to be follow-up characters especially. So one of the teams I'm going to talk about first is going to be a quote-unquote dual DPS setup depending on how you're doing it, and that is going to be with Asheville, since Asheville is just very good with Welt. Both of them have 40% defense decreases to enemies by just existing technically. For Welt, you just have them in waitlist, and then for Asheville it's practically permanent just because they have to have bait on the field, which is always. Their debuffs for each other work great, and Asheville has a lot of frequency to stack up Welt's damage percent buff for every character individually. So you can run these two as the core and then have another AoE buffer depending. Of course, this does depend on what you're aiming for, since you can run this team as Welt mainly just being a pure support here with just a Eagle Von Walk setup where you just ignore his damage entirely and you're mainly focusing on Asheville, or a dual DPS setup. So for a dual DPS setup, you would run like this, and then you would also have someone like Tribi, and your last slot would go to sustain, be it Danheng or even Aventurion in this case. I'll just put Aventurion for an example. So it could be like this. If you're running Welt as the more support here, then you could change out one of these characters for a action advancer for Asheville specifically, such as Sparkle, RMC, or -1 Sunday. And like I did mention, sustain the setups with Welt is very common, so you actually don't necessarily need to sustain here. So this could just be another AoE buffer, or even another debuffer such as Cypher, or whatever you do have available. So a team could also look something like this, where you also mainly focus on Asheville, but Welt is still getting AoE buffs from Asheville's debuffs and also Tribi. For a pure hyper carry Welt, that also could depend. If you're just doing a -1 setup, you would have the action advancer character, so Sunday for an example here. And then you would have another support here, so I'm just going to put Tribi for an example. Instead of Tribi, you can use a debuffer like Cypher, Silverwolf, so on and so forth. And last thought, since again, Welt sustainless is very much enabled, you can throw in another support, but if you want to be extra careful, then again, sustain with someone like Danheng. If you're using banned enemies on Welt, be sure to keep in mind you are forced to use Danheng. But yeah, if you're leaning more into the sustainless side of Welt, which is going to be where he excels, you could use a debuffer or a buffer in a case like this. You can even use Welt in something like a sustainless dot setup as well, so running the 3 main dot characters and then Welt as a sustainless slot, this also completely works. On a Cyrene-less Anoxa Hypercarry team, you can use them there as well. If you're trying to revive this dead character, you can use her as well. If you don't have Cypher and you have Xiaochu, you can put him there instead. If you want to do one Nihility, you could take her out and put on another support, like an action advancer for Acheron. If you need to sustain, you just sub out one of them for sustain as well. Works great with sustainless Archer as well. There is just so many team options you can do. Realistically, again, you could just swap him in for any sustain you have on a team as a sustainless option, as he probably will work there. Some teams like Break, or of course something like Modern Remembrance, will have their definitive options where Welt will never be an upgrade on. But for a substitute, maybe you have to use one of those specific characters on a different team, or you just don't have them. He can honestly work really good there. More value, of course, if you have E4 and above. More value, of course, if you have E4 with the all-type res lower. That's where the main universality of his power comes from. Other than that, he is more of a slight cope option, but he still just is universally good. And that is the full Welt buffed guide. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, drop a like, would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all the tips to all content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.